We're here. Holly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a long time coming. We were just talking off air. Obviously, we had technical difficulties last time, and I think it's been nearly 2 months. So so it was meant to be.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had natural disasters in the meantime, and here we are. We finally arrived.
Yes. So, question I always ask everyone: you're at a bus stop, a complete stranger stands next to you and asks you what you do for a living. What do you say?
Oh, I find this question challenging in Australia, actually. It's a little bit easier when I go to America. People are a little bit more kind of open to alternative ways of living and being. But here in Australia, I usually say to people, I teach in the online space, and that's the basics of it. The deeper version is that I'm a human design specialist. So I teach a lot about energetics, mostly from the lens of human design, but I'm also a breathwork and meditation practitioner. I do EFT and Reiki. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. I was a registered nurse many, many years ago, so I bring in a lot of kind of physiological concepts to the work that I do. And I often speak to people about not just energetic alignment and that whole kind of spiritual awakening, spiritual development journey, but also how does that apply to things like business and success and money and these very tangible real world concepts.
Amazing. You got such a broad spectrum of work. And before I dive into your background a little bit more, and because I love the each individual's journey of how we ended up doing what we do now. But one question I'm finding I get asked at the workshops, and I'd love to ask you this, is that how would you determine a spiritual awakening? Like what is...
It's not pretty, is it? It's like everyone thinks the spiritual awakening is this kind of like glorious, magical, the rainbows are out and the birds are singing, when it's actually, I think it's more the mess. I think it's the deconstructing of all of the narratives, of all of the beliefs, of all of the identities that you've been holding that are just not correct for you. And so for everyone that looks a bit different. It's going to show up at different times and in different ways, but we do tend to all have that same theme of, I reached a point where my life could not continue as it was, and this whole new pathway opened up to me. So I stepped onto it, and here I am.
Amazing. And do you feel that we as humans in general all go through our own little hero's journey or awakening while we're given the gift to be here?
I hope so. I think we all have the opportunity. I think that we're constantly surrounded by just energetic doorways that are open saying, do you want to go now? Do you want to go now? Do you want to go now? But it's still free choice. We're still autonomous beings. And for some people, for whatever reason, they choose not to. They choose not to develop in that way. And for other people, it seems like they can't get there quick enough, right? They want to do it really early and want to do it really fast. So I think that's a fascinating area of understanding the soul and understanding, the purpose of a life journey and what did you come here for and why are you doing it the unique way that you're doing it.
You mentioned about Australians not being so open as if you were in America. I haven't spent much time in America, so I don't know. I only see what I see here in Australia. Were you that Australian, not open to it, or were you open to it?
I think, it's kind of staged across my journey. And like anywhere, there are pockets in Australia. You're up near Byron, so I think you're probably in one of the most progressive parts of Australia in terms of spirituality and energetics. I'm in Canberra, so we're probably the least open to anything that's not political or bureaucratic. I think that in my childhood, I came from a very sort of traditional white middle-class family. We were religious, we went to church. For many years, I worked for the church. And to me, that was spirituality. That was spirituality in a nice, neat little package and in a bag. Until I kind of came into my adulthood, as I was getting into my 20s, and I was just repeatedly seeing and sensing over and over again that religion was a community and religion was a set of rules and religion was an identity in and of itself, but it was kind of starkly lacking in spirituality. I kept feeling that there was church, but God was not in church. So for me, stepping outside of religion was a really important part of my journey, because I had to remove myself from that identity. I had to remove myself from that pathway. And I think too, I was kind of one of those people in churches that would question things and ask and always want to expand in new ways and try new things. And that was pretty challenging for the more conservative people around me.
Wow, yeah. And I've had people on the pod, because I wasn't brought up with a religious um, childhood at all. I kind of bypassed that altogether, just by accident, really. It wasn't,
Yeah.
through choice or anything. And I'm curious to you, did you find that then difficult to let go of, to step into spirituality, or was it a natural progression for you?
I think it got let go of for me, honestly. I think that was part, in retrospect, that was part of my spiritual awakening, to come back to, where does religion fit in this? Where does God fit in this? And can I still be an active member in something like a church community, and also be spiritually expanding and be adventurous in that spirituality, be exploring in new and different ways? And the answer to that for me was no. I couldn't do both. And so I chose to leave. I chose to leave religion and experience life in a really different way. But I do know of people who can manage kind of the hybrid. They can manage to keep a foot in almost both
Okay.
camps.
Yeah. And what were you doing at the time, career-wise? I believe you were a nurse. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, that was my kind of long background. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, because I'm fascinated as well in that journey, because clearly you're there to help others and support others that are needing it, as a carer. And then
Mm.
at what point was there a breakdown to break through? Because you mentioned about spiritual awakenings getting really messy. What started to happen for you on your journey?
I did a lot of those repeating patterns in life, which I think everyone does, where I would, go into an experience and think it would be really different, and then the same pattern would emerge. And I'd be really unsatisfied, and I'd feel like I was really disillusioned, right? That things weren't working out the way that I wanted them to. Nursing was one of those things. I adored nursing. I loved my nursing degree. I loved being a nurse. I was 90% fully, deeply enthralled with it. But that 10% nagged at me all the time, that it felt like it was not whole enough. It was not big enough. It was not expansive enough. There were, areas of sort of traditionalism and conservatism in the medical industry, of course. As a nurse, it's difficult to break out of those, because you're still very caught up in the day-to-day hustle. There's so much work to do as a nurse. And so I left nursing, and I had an opportunity from a friend to go into business. There was a friend of mine who needed a business manager for his brother's company. It was very obscure. And I'd never worked in business before, and I'd never been a business manager. And they just sort of said, "Hey, you'll be great. Come on in." And I ended up business managing that company for several years. And it really started me on this whole avenue of business that I just had never, it had never come into my awareness. It had never come into my perspective. I didn't grow up with, business owning family members. I didn't know anyone who owned their own business. I'd never thought of myself as being a business owner or participating in any kind of like high level business management. And what I found is that I loved it. I loved it. I loved the strategy. I loved the structure. I loved the complexity, the adventurous nature of business, that you can move it in any direction you want to go. So I kind of bumped around in that space for a lot of years, doing business consulting, business management, until ultimately I decided to go on my own. And that's really where the crux, I think, of my spiritual awakening started. It was when I decided to do my own business. My husband and I purchased a liquidated business. It was a big cafe venue. And those patterns of trying to find something new, trying to find something exciting, trying to find this place to be expansive, and it all sort of not working out, right? It all just sort of breaking down and becoming boring, or I wasn't able to get anywhere, or I didn't feel aligned. Those all came to a really intense head in that business. And I mean, financially, we were able to take that business from bankrupt to over $2 million annual turnover in under 2 years. Right? And so from the outside, it looked spectacular. On the inside, I was working 100 hours a week. I was completely unsatisfied. It was extraordinarily toxic. It was a really kind of emotionally violent situation and environment to be in, with investors and previous owners and a whole bunch of stuff going on. And it reached the point where all of it just became untenable, right? I was broken down. My body was breaking down. I developed a stress-induced heart condition. And I came out of that thinking, I just can't repeat this pattern again. I've like reached the top. I'm now owning my own business. It's creating all of this money, and these patterns are still here. I'm still unsatisfied. I still don't like it. It still doesn't feel like I'm helping people, or I'm serving, or I'm contributing in any meaningful way. And so from that, I took, golly, I don't even know, months and months and months kind of out of life. Just, at some points being deeply depressed, at other points feeling like I was really discovering new parts of myself, doing a lot of wound healing, trauma work. I kind of started off by diving into meditation, which I think is a great access point for everyone, and rediscovering my body in new ways, rediscovering my soul in new ways. And that's where my work now was built out of. Pretty quick to put it in a nutshell. I mean, the whole process was a little over 4 years, though.
Wow, 4 years. Amazing. When, from that point then, I'm curious, what was the first step into then starting to teach this work? 'Cause I want to dive into human design in a moment, but were there any other particular things beyond meditation that really helped you start to piece everything together? Because I'm just thinking of the listeners here today, because with our retreats and workshops that we run across the country, people are generally in that soup, but they haven't quite identified what's going on yet of that change. I'm just curious from your insight and journey.
Soup is such a good word for it. It really is soup, isn't it? It's like murky. For me, somatic work was really helpful. I'm far more one of those very kind of practical spirituality people than I am the very floaty spirituality people. And I think we need both types. I think we need all of us. So for me, somatic work was great because it was grounding. It was something that I could do with my body and connect into what am I feeling in a particular place in my body, and then what is that telling me about what's going on. So that was really profound. I kind of moved from there into some more intense work, like doing breath work, then became really helpful for me. I've always used acupuncture. Acupuncture has always been a great energetic aligner for me. It's always been closely linked to my spiritual growth and my spiritual awakening. So yeah, I certainly have a good connection point in my body. And I think a lot of people do. I think it gives you a beautiful roadmap with which to start.
I was going to say, if you could explain somatic work for people that weren't familiar, but I think you pretty much summarized it all there.
Yeah, it's the soma, it's the body, right? So it's this communication between your body and your energy. How is your body holding particular energies? And then how is that showing up symptomatically? So often if you can't connect to what you're feeling, right, energetically, and what that's telling you, you can connect to how your body is presenting physically, and then sort of dive down through that access point.
Beautiful. And this might lead me on, but again, I'm going off on a tangent before we get into human design. I apologize, but energetic transmutation, then would that then, could you jump on that? Because I think that's a good segue from where you are now into that kind of work.
Yeah.
We don't consider the energetics. Yeah. How would you explain it, first of all?
I mean, to me, it's science, it's physics, yeah, that energy exists. Everything is energy. We're all made of energetic ions. Everything that you have around you and within you is energetic ions. And we know that one of the principles of energy is that for every energy's action, you have an equal and opposite reaction. Yeah, it's thermodynamics. That's what transmutation is. It's recognizing that you can be in a particular energetic frequency, but the equal opposite energy is also available to you. It's the flip side of the same coin. I think that it gets challenging to describe exactly what transmutation is, because it's a slightly individualized, kind of nuanced process. What works for me to transmute energy might not work for you, or might just not even resonate with you. I love to use, again, physical tools. I use a lot of breath work in transmutation. So physically actually moving that energy out of my body and then resetting myself into another one. For other people, things like visualization, meditation, journaling, reflection work, they are more helpful. Any of those tools that are available will allow you to transmute energy. But the beginning point is always to recognize, simply because I'm feeling this energy doesn't mean I'm stuck here. Energy is always movable. I can actually transmute this. I can hold it and change it and reshape it into something else entirely, which becomes really empowering when you start to look at your energetic experiences that way.
Yeah. And would you be say it's fair to say, I'm just trying to think, wording this, that because I always think of us as like leaky buckets. We're just wasting so much energy on on survival mode and trying to control and keeping ourselves like safe. And that word unknown can be terrified. But then of course that energy has been wasted when we could transmute that into something more empowering, more powerful, and to actually start to create and visualize the future that we want and embody those emotions. Would that be a
Oh
fair
gosh, yes.
explanation?
Yeah, 100%. I think that we do have a bit of an issue with our expectation of needing to be present all the time. We get that a lot in spirituality, that we have to always be, conscious. We have to always be present. And I'm not sure that the human experience lends itself to that level of intensity. I'm not sure that we can always be present and we can always be conscious. But we certainly can be aware of what our energy is doing most of the time and really be responsible owners of that energy and use it. It's an asset. We can leverage it. We can use that for our own growth. To me, energy is a tool, right? It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just a tool to move in particular directions or experience particular things, and everyone has that available to them.
Yeah. At what point then did you want to start teaching this work from your transition? Because obviously you're using it initially to work with yourself
Mm.
and overcome those challenges, especially like you're saying with the business and everything, that 4-year period. At what point did you know that was like right? Because you're stepping into the unknown again, then, isn't it? Because you're still having to let go of the old self, the old identity. It's constantly moving. I'm just
Mhm.
intrigued because I ask you this question because I know so many people that continually study, continually lean into this work, but they don't action it. Like they like
Mm.
it's like, how many more courses do we need to do before I'm ready?
Yeah,
Kind
right.
of
You're
thing.
never ready. You're never ready. I had moved out of our business, our brick and mortar business, and after about a year of recovery and rest, I started online. I wanted to go back into business, but I didn't feel safe enough to do that in the way that I'd previously done it. I felt really kind of wounded still by that, and I felt that was far too vulnerable for me to do. So I stepped into the online space, and I started off actually just as a business coach. That was all, because I knew business. People were asking me about
Hmm.
business. I figured I could talk to people on the internet about business pretty easy. And that all of that was happening while my spiritual awakening was still occurring, while I was still really letting go of a lot of stuff, purging a lot of stuff, wrestling with new identities, trying to understand energy. And that really just naturally started to leach into my work. I found that the people that were coming to me didn't usually have strategic business problems. They had mindset problems. They had energy problems, right? They had limiting beliefs. And so I started speaking about that work. And there were a number of points along the way where I thought, I'm not even well-versed enough in this. Like, I don't have anywhere near enough of myself together to be teaching other people this. And I recognized that if I could just teach one step behind, all I needed to be was one step ahead. That was it, because I don't need to show people the entire picture. I just need to give them the assistance with where they're at. And as long as I've been there and I've journeyed through that and I've got some wisdom about that, that's all I need. I stayed in the business coaching space for about 18 months, 2 years. It was good. Again, it was a really, successful business. It worked really well, but it felt like I was very much hiding behind a lot of that kind of business facade. For me, I wanted to speak about just energetics, just spirituality. I wanted to kind of bring the whole boldness of all of that to people. And so I shut my business down, got rid of all of my coaching clients, went into a 5-month retreat just on my own, in my own space. And I mean, essentially, I kind of eventually like mustered enough courage to just come out and rebuild the business from the ground up. And that's where human design was born from, in that place, which completely took me by surprise. I didn't think that, I was going to use any other system or learn any other tools. But that 5-month time away was really when human design came into my space, and I learned a lot about it. I did eventually certify in human design and gene keys, and it changed everything. So now it doesn't feel foreign at all to only speak about spirituality and energetics. But a couple of years ago, it was terrifying.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. Yeah, because that's what that's what normally happens. It certainly was for me as well. Like I find I'll talk about anything pretty much in these realms now. Like, it's gone right down the rabbit hole. But when I first started doing it, I was like, "Whoa, what are people going to think?" But people only
Correct, yeah.
generally listen if they're only ready to listen, and they'll dive in. The rest just move on by, don't they?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you studied the gene keys as well. Is that correct?
I did, yeah. I believe you've
Wow.
had Richard Rudd on this podcast, which is just, hero moment. That's really exciting.
Yeah,
He's an
wow.
incredible man.
I mean, I've seen the book. Like, it's wow. That's huge.
It's not bedtime reading. It's not. No, it's not light. No.
Wow, you got a passion for the work. So which one did you hear about first, gene keys or human design?
Human design came first. And I found that gene keys really offered a beautiful depth to human design. I mean, there's a lot of human design that can be really physically focused in terms of the biomechanics of the body. But I found that gene keys, for me, coming from a medical background, added that huge extra layer of looking at really specifically how this shows up in the body, how this shows up in genetic mapping, how that then becomes behavioral, psychological, neurological. For me, that was just fascinating. It felt like the whole picture had actually come into view.
Wow, incredible. Hats off to you. It's incredible. So human design, how did you hear about it? And I guess, what is it in layman's terms for them who's completely unaware of it?
I initially found out about it, honestly, just from other people referring to it. I was in a mastermind, I think, and I was in a group of other people, and they were all introducing themselves and just using a lot of those spiritual labels, right? Everyone was showing up with like, oh, I'm a life path 4 and a this and a that, and they were using human design in amongst that. And I didn't want to have any part of it. I was not interested in any of the labels. I always felt like there's too much. There's too much language. There's too many labels. It kind of limits us and suppresses us, really. But I went and looked up my design and, shot back these words and said, this is what I am, having absolutely no understanding what it was. And then every time human design came in my space, when people I knew spoke to me about it or contacted me about it or shared about their journey, I vehemently opposed it. I was like, that is great for you. I have zero interest in investigating any of that. I'm good on my own journey. And eventually I was over for a retreat weekend over in the States. And one of the people that was at that retreat, I was staying at an Airbnb with her, and she was a human design teacher. She'd been in human design for 5 years at that point. And I had a very distinct moment. I had a very specific moment of her speaking about human design. And I said, all right, hands up, I surrender. If this thing is continuously coming back into my life and so many people are bringing it back and it's always showing up for me, then I'll take it. Whatever journey I need to go on with this thing, I'll take it. And I mean, that, as I said earlier, I had no idea I would go so far into it. But that seems to be the experience for almost everyone coming into human design, is that they don't find human design, it finds them.
Yeah, right.
Which is kind of cool, I think, from an energetic perspective. The human design system itself, I mean, the short note of it is it's called the science of differentiation. Essentially what that means is that this is a system of energetics that teaches you how you are uniquely different from everybody else. I think a lot of systems that we have show us how we are meant to be the same as everyone. We get grouped right into categories, and we get this kind of list of qualities, especially when you look at things like astrology, Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, all those kind of aspects, that they say, here's the general pool of things that you should be. And if you're not that, well then tough luck, right? Your loss. Human design really has the opposite viewpoint. It says you have individualized, unique, specific energetic qualities, behaviors, shadows, wounds, triggers, gifts, purposes. They are all unique specifically to you, and they are never replicated anywhere in anyone. So you can have people with a lot of similarities to you, but they are not exactly you. So human design creates a blueprint, right? We call it a body graph, which is just a fusion of so many things. It was originally a channeled system by a man named Uru Hu. He channeled the whole system and then spent 30 years kind of making it his life's work. And it's a fusion. It's a fusion of science and spirituality. We have epigenetics and quantum mechanics and a lot of physics and physiology in the science aspect. And then on the spirituality side, there's a lot of astrology. There's the I Ching, the Kabbalah, the chakra system. So I find that human design is helpful for a lot of people because there's so many doorways to get into it. It's like whatever lens you want to look at this from, you can probably find a way that this helps you and that this speaks to you, and it gives you a language to understand yourself more.
Wow. So there's multiple questions here. The first one is then, well, how do you find out your unique signature, if that's the right word?
Super easy. Yeah, super easy. There are free websites that do it. You can go to jovianarchive.com, geneticmatrix.com, even mybodygraph.com. You can just Google human design, honestly, and it'll come up with a graph tool. You put in your birth data. So you need your name, your place of birth, your specific birth time. That is really important in human design, that you have your specific birth time. And then it will shoot you out a very complex looking chart of like gobbledygook of shapes and lines and numbers and symbols, which you then need to learn to interpret.
Wow. And then what do you do with that?
Like, what's the point? What do you?
Because I've still got your chart you give me of mine. It's on my desktop, but every time I look at it, I'm like, wow, there's a lot there.
There's so much. I like to view human design as an onion. It's a layer system. So you can come in at the outside layer and just play with that. And then when you're ready, move down to the next layer. That's always the best way to go about it. Otherwise, it's just so overwhelming. Really, the outside layer is the energy type. It's the only part of human design that is a little bit more generalized, a little bit more broad. It breaks society down into 5 different energy types, and each of those energy types has a particular role, kind of a way that they show up in the world and a way that they feel aligned being in the world. We have a particular strategy that goes with being that energy type as well, and we get like a list of characteristics that are pretty common to other people in your energy type. So if you can dive into a little bit of what does it mean to be this energy type, whatever your graph shows you, that's usually the best place to begin. You'll find a lot of resonance in that.
Okay. And then once you have that information and you know your energy type, does that then, how does that support you in everyday life? Does it sort of give you reassurance, or where you can see where your roadblocks are? Like, how does that start to then show up?
Recognition is always the biggest thing. I think
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, particularly for the rarer types, there's a recognition of, oh, I always knew I was different. I always knew I was unusual and not the same as everybody. And this is actually telling me that that's true. And it's telling me why. It's telling me how I'm different. So recognition is always a beautiful thing in that experience. Other than that, it kind of gives you this like a great container ahead where you can recognize, oh, as this energy type, these are likely to be my pitfalls. These are likely to be the parts that I struggle with. These are probably the reasons why I've had difficult dynamics in relationships or workplaces, or even within myself, right, with my own journey. Additionally, it shows you where your energy is most aligned to thrive. That's why we talk about strategy in human design, because every energy type has a different strategic use of that energy. And more often than not, people are doing everything but that strategy, right? We veer away from the one thing that's most helpful for us. And so just understanding that strategy, knowing this is how my energy is designed to operate. This is what I'm here to do in the world. This is, how I'm here to energetically be in the world. And this is strategically how I can be most aligned in that. What that allows us to do is kind of drop everything else that we're carrying. We're so caught up with trying to find the answers and trying to go down the perfect path and bring it all together. I find that human design is a great experience of just letting so much go, letting so much drop, and bringing your focus into the things that just work for you.
Wow. And you said there were 5 different types at the surface level. Is that right? At the larger level?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
just to give us an example then, what would those 5 be, and how do they differentiate, to people, just to give people a taste of what that looks like?
So our most common types are our generators, and that's you, Guy. You're a generator.
I'm a generator.
So our you are, yeah. They're about 37% of society. And our generators really are the creators, and they're the builders, right? The generators are amazing at sustaining creative things and going back to them over and over to master them. So a lot of these kind of social concepts that we've got are really a bit of a they've become quite toxic. Things like the 9-to-5 workday and always having a full schedule and getting up at 5 a.m. every morning to exercise, and hustle culture. A lot of that has come from the misuse of generator energy that says, I have a lot of physical energy when I'm lit up by something. When I get really excited about something, then I have an abundance of physical energy to give it. But that energy, for a lot of the time for generators, has been kind of sideswiped and taken away and said, well, I should use my physical energy for these things over here, but they don't satisfy me. They don't light me up. And so I'm tired and I'm a bit disillusioned with the whole thing. So our generators are probably the most physically energetic of everyone, but it really is about the joy of existence. It's about the joy of responding to things that give you that spark, that give you that inner fire. We then have our manifesting generators. So they're a hybrid type, and they're at about 33% of society. Manifesting generators are like the generators, all of the physical energy, but they're sort of like on drugs. They're so intense. They are the people that can multitask. They want to be juggling a lot of different balls in the air all at one time, because they have the physical desire to respond, to create, to build, to sustain that generators have. But they also have this manifestor quality to them, which means they want to do new things. They want to innovate. They want to initiate, right? They want to kind of carve out their own path. So this is why we see people who genuinely are really good at multitasking. They're amazing at doing 50 different things in their schedule during the day. And they oftentimes are so shocked that other people can't do that too, right? Often they're the ones who are like, gosh, you're pretty lazy having a rest in the afternoons. Like, it's just because everybody else can't keep up with you. We can't sustain that. Yeah. Then we have our projectors. Projectors are at about 20% of society. They're what we call a non-sacral type. So they are a non-physical energy type. They don't have much physical energy at all. They are our guides, our teachers. They love to go into things in detail. They love knowledge. They have a really penetrating energy. So they just love to help people, to teach people, to bring things to fruition, to solve problems. We see a lot of projectors in politics and in teaching and also in the coaching space because they can help. They can help. They can see what's going on for you and your energy, and they want to help bring that to a better place. Then we have our manifestors, which is my energy type. We're at only 9%. So our energy type contributes to the manifesting generators. That's where we get the two types together. The manifestors are also a non-sacral type. We don't have much physical energy, and we're the only type with a closed aura. In human design, it's referred to as the closed aura. So we really kind of run separately. We're the lone wolves. We're very independent. Our energy operates to be visionaries and initiators. We're here to create completely new things. And we do that rather unexpectedly. We sort of feel an urge and we come out and we initiate it, and it's out there in the world, and then we don't want it anymore. We're tired and we need to rest. So we go away again and we let everybody else take whatever it is that we created. Ra, the original kind of recorder and creator of human design, was a manifestor, which is not really surprising, right? Because he just channeled and created this entire system, did it for as long as he was alive, and then he passed away, and now it's become everybody else's work. And the reflectors are our last type. They're at only 1%. So super, super rare if you have a reflector in your life. Much like the opposite of manifestors. So manifestors have a closed energy. The reflectors have a completely open energy. So they are our wise sages. They're mirrors for us. So they receive everything from the environment and the collective around them, energetically speaking. They process it deeply, and then they produce wisdom on that. So we don't see many examples of reflectors in society, largely because they do best when they're separate. They do best when they're away. You often find them kind of running permaculture farms up in the mountains in a cabin, right? Like they're, because being around everybody else's energy is a lot for them.
Wow. And do some of those traits roll in as you go deeper under the onion layers? Do they kind of roll into each other, like different crossovers?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There are plenty of nuances underneath. Once you start getting into the specificities, you might see that you're perhaps a projector that maybe has some of the manifestor qualities, right? Or you might be a generator who really enjoys multitasking sometimes because you have some of those other energies filtering in through your chart. So it's everyone is unique. Nobody is static. Nobody is replicated.
And do certain types get along better with certain types per se? Because I'm thinking if even in business or even in relationships and families, or where, quite often relationships can be complex. And if you start to whether it's, personal or business, and if you start to understand these traits, that then you could potentially pair people up with different traits that are supporting each other as opposed to conflicting. I'm just speaking out loud.
Absolutely.
That's true.
It's an absolutely correct train of thought that you've got. The underlying meaning, I believe the whole underlying meaning of human design and why it's here and why it's available for us is that it's a system and a language that allows harmony. That when you can understand, I am different from you, but that's not bad. That you have qualities that are amazing that I can witness, and sometimes I can borrow when I'm up in your energy, and you can do the same with me, then we remove a lot of that antagonism. I think particularly in the context of relationships, we tend to think that the things that the other person is doing that we don't like are a weakness or something that's broken or something that's faulty in them. But in my experience, viewing it through human design, it's often just that the person has a completely different energetic frequency to you. And as soon as you recognize that, you begin valuing them for who they are. And that's a really healing place to be in, I think. And if we can do that on a more collective level, then imagine what we can move into, right? There are certainly types that go better together than others. I think the generators and manifesting generators tend to play pretty well together because you have a lot of this kind of creative, build it, sustain it, we get really satisfied from doing kind of energy. Projectors and manifestors tend to flow really well together as well, because the manifestor wants to create something completely brand new and the projector wants to guide. So there's a natural balance between those two. I think reflectors can get along with anybody. In reality, they sort of shape shift and they're like chameleons. They can move their identity to fit their environment. And then we do have some relationships that can be a bit fraught. Generators and projectors together can be challenged, right? That can be a bit of a struggle for them because the projector feels the need to keep up with the generator, and the generator often struggles to understand why the projector needs to rest. Manifesting generators and manifestors can have quite a bit of conflict together because we have such similarities in our qualities with that manifestor energy being shared, except a manifestor will come out and initiate and do it in a burst and then go away for a long period of deep rest and reflection. Whereas a manifesting generator doesn't need that rest. A manifesting generator will initiate multiple things at once and then move on to the next thing, right? And so often they think that manifestors are going slowly. So, I mean, they're generalizations, but yeah, there are kind of certain characteristics that we see show up in relationship and business and workplace dynamics amongst the energy types.
Interesting. If you had a business with lots of staff turning over and you were employing people all the time, would you actually run them through the human design before employing them?
Yeah, I do. So I have 12 staff at the moment, and
wow.
they're all hired with an understanding of exactly what their human design is and what they're bringing and how it's interacting with each other and how it's interacting with mine and how it's interacting with the business. Because I think it's valuable data to have. I think it allows me to be a more supportive employer. It allows them to take a more autonomous role as well. I find it just brings more kind of equilibrium to the workplace.
Yeah, amazing. Absolutely amazing. Fantastic. Thanks for clarifying all that. I can see that's definitely a rabbit hole that you could easily get lost in. Are there any books on it as well? Could people go and buy a book even, or are you better off just coming to see you for a reading, or like what's the best approach for this kind of stuff?
There are books, but they're a lot like the Gene Keys book from Richard Rudd. I mean, they're paperweights, they're huge, and they're very dense and they're very intense. The Definitive Book of Human Design is one of the best ones. Quantum Human Design is also a really good one. That's from Karen Curry Parker. And she was somebody who trained with Ra himself. So she's got a really unique viewpoint on a lot of stuff. I find that the best way to get into it, though, is to have someone interpret your chart, because really what we're about as humans is that we want to be seen. Yeah, we want to have someone see us and we want to see ourselves. And the most straightforward exchange for that is to have somebody read this data for you, read this body graph, this blueprint, and say, hey, these are the things that I see in you according to this data. And so it's often quite a emotional experience for people having their first reading, because they feel witnessed, they feel recognized. And there are now a ton of readers out there, which is great. It's really beautiful. There are so many readers, and every one of them will bring their own flavor and their own spin. So you can definitely find a reader to book in with, or there's plenty of kind of like blogs and podcasts and that kind of stuff. Human design's becoming a lot more relevant over the last few years. So there's a plethora of information if it's something that you want to dive into for yourself.
Yeah, beautiful. And just the last couple of questions, Holly. Like, what do people mainly come and see you for? What are they generally the biggest challenges?
I specialize in a manifestor community. So when I came into human design and I was building it into my business, I very quickly found, classically as a manifestor myself, that I didn't want to do it the way that everybody else did it. And I didn't want to follow the rules, and I didn't want to walk the same pathway. And I found that there were no examples for manifestors. We were really misunderstood. We were very rare. We were very kind of strange creatures. And I just wanted to speak to people about that. I just wanted to say, hey, this is my experience. Maybe I'm 2 steps ahead of you. Maybe I'm 3 steps ahead of you, but let me show you what I've learned about being a manifestor, and maybe that will help you too. And that has grown into a beautiful, large, thriving audience of manifestors who come exactly for that. They come to say, oh my gosh, I actually get myself now. I actually understand myself now. There's a lot of I think complexity to the teachings in human design, in every one of the energy types and every layer of the human design system.
Wow.
That when somebody specializes in teaching in that area, it's glorious. It's really, really healing. So that's largely what people come to me for, is if they've discovered they're a manifestor and they want to know what that means. Sure can.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So yours is still recording. For some reason, Riverside cut out. So that's great.
That's good. That's good. I'm still here though. Yeah.
I'm having a heart attack over here. I'm like, this has been a brilliant podcast.
Let's hope the recording worked.
Yeah. I think it did. I'm going to ask one last question
Great.
to finish, Holly, just to ensure that we've got it in the bag. And that is, with everything we've covered today, what would you love to leave our listeners to ponder on?
I am so enamored with people witnessing more of themselves, right? With people having a experience here as a human in this human life, learning more about themselves, learning what they're here to contribute, learning, even if that means what's stopping you from contributing. I think that we have a space of being whole, of being healed, of being aligned, and everybody should be able to take that journey if they want to. So whatever language, whatever system, whatever theology resonates with you, pursue it. Walk down that road. It doesn't have to be human design. It doesn't have to be meditation. It doesn't have to be, anything necessarily. Just pick the pathway that really resonates for you and start unraveling that, because it's a really kind of wild and wonderful journey. And most people find that they are completely different on the other side of it. And that's a really beautiful thing.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing, Holly. Last question. Where can we send everyone if they want to find out more about your work, what you do, and connect?
I am largely on Instagram. So you can find me on Instagram at @thehollymaree. My website is thehollymaree.com. Super simple. We also have a podcast called the Hunting for Purpose podcast, where we talk about a lot about human design, about the manifestor energy type, about energetics and spirituality. So those are my kind of 3 big places that you'll discover me.
Perfect. All the links will be in the show notes below for everyone listening or watching this today. Holly, thank you so much. What a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time, everything that you're doing and putting out into the world, and coming on the podcast today. That was awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. It's a privilege.